Hey, Gavin.
Hey, Louie.
Are you hungry like the wolf, babe?
Oh, I am. I can't think of any of the other lyrics of that. Wow. And I know my Duran Duran.
Yeah, they have a new album coming out, and I was just thinking about, like, what if they just released the same songs again? And, like, I would love that, actually, you know? Like, Rio, hello? Like,
yeah,
the banger,
Simon Le Bon. Just.
Yeah. You can't get over the true beginning, the bangers.
I guess don't re-release Electric Barbarella, even though I do kind of like that song. It's kind of sexist.
You know, a lot of things for the time, you know, and I think we're going to get into that with
that one
today's
came in the
episode
90s. Well. How shame. Shame on you.
A lot of bad things came in the 90s, Gavin. Come on, let's be real. Hi, welcome everyone. This is The Mixed Reviews.
We are a film podcast in which we take a film subject, such as an actor, director, or a mini genre, and we give you a pop history, and then sometimes we look at the good, and we look at the bad, and then we tell you what we like and what we don't like so much.
Yeah, we take 2 weeks to watch as much as we can, and then we deliver it to you piping hot, fresh, so you can, you know, make some decisions. Go watch some good stuff.
Especially during spooky season, use our show, go watch some good things, you know, dim the lights, turn the sound way up, get yourself scared, pop some popcorn, sit on the couch.
Yeah, I would say we're at our most powerful during the spooky season. Gavin makes me do things I would never do before. I am but a puppet, and he's the master.
I was going to say, it's very Cabinet of Dr. Caligari in that way. You're the Caesar to my Caligari.
But Gavin, Ookie Spooky, we're not alone today.
No, we are not.
We have a very special guest. Literally wrote the book on our subject. So please, everyone, welcome. It's Craig Mann.
Hello. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me, especially to talk about werewolves.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on.
Craig, I have to ask really quickly, who is that in your bedroom? What am I seeing?
Well, this is actually my living room, and that's that's a cardboard cutout of Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator, but because it's spooky season, he has a vampire mask on, which is why he's
incredible,
looking slightly sinister behind me. Yeah.
Incredible.
You can probably spot Daffy Duck back there somewhere as well.
I love that you were like, oh no, this is the living room. People see this.
Oh yeah. I'm not ashamed of my interest.
I love that so much. Before we get into why we've brought you here today, for your expertise, we got to take a look back at our last episode, which we talked about John Carpenter, the Prince of Darkness himself. And we asked you guys to go online and vote for your favorite John Carpenter movie, and here are the results. My pick, They Live, came in at last place at 9%. I feel like people haven't seen They Live.
Yeah.
You should go check it out.
They Live should not be last.
Yeah.
That is sacrilege.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you. Okay.
Well, I was just going to say, first of all, these are, we can only do 4 per every, and second of all, none of these are bad movies. So like, even if you lose this poll, you're still a winner.
Thank you. Because Gavin's pick, The Fog, came in third place at 25%. It was very close between The Fog and Halloween. Halloween came in at second with 26%. And kind of a surprise win, I would say, The Thing came in at first at 40%.
I am not surprised. I'm not surprised in
either.
the least. Yeah.
I thought the Halloween girls were going to come out. But The Thing really, you know, and what I really liked was because I'd never seen The Thing, watched it for this episode or the episode last time. It's really fucking good. And it fucking freaked me out in ways that I didn't appreciate. But like, it's really good. It's this, we had a lot of fun folks talking about, you know, all their different ookie spooky faves.
I will say, and I don't want to shit on anything right out of the gate, but maybe the Halloween gals didn't come out for Halloween because of a certain movie that came out. Just saying. I'm not saying that it's, you know, kills a franchise, but it's.
Am I with two people who didn't like Halloween Kills?
I doubt Lou even saw it.
I didn't see it. No,
but I did not like it.
Oh, okay. I thought it was pretty entertaining.
Okay, here we go. The reviews, they're mixed.
They're mixed already. Well, it's been a pleasure having you, Craig.
I think it's got a really interesting political message as well. But anyway, that's
politics aside, like I don't know. It didn't do much for me. But I mean, yeah, it's definitely striving for something. I think being in the midst of all of this is also, I'm like, I'm like, who are the dummies that this is for? Anyways, like, sorry.
Craig, I wanted to ask
Me?
It's very, Craig is like, hi, I'm right here.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask Craig, do you have a favorite John Carpenter movie?
They Live. Yeah. I mean, They Live is by far one of my favorite films of all time.
Yeah.
I think it's also one of the most important films of all time
Yeah.
in being a very accessible deconstruction of capitalism.
Yes.
Yes, by far They Live. And after that, I really, really like The Fog. I do love The Thing, but I just think it's the film that most people talk about when they talk about John Carpenter, apart from Halloween. So They Live as a...
Yeah. It doesn't need the shine. I mean, yeah, They Live rocked me backward and forward. We had also people talking about, of course, Escape from New York, and a couple of his other movies.
I was going to say, we did definitely get somebody who said, sorry that neither of us really liked Big Trouble in Little China. It's their favorite. And I'm like, it's okay. Well, I mean, take a look at it a little deeper, and maybe you'll feel...
Big Trouble is a childhood favorite of mine.
Yes.
Correct.
But it is... Yeah,
there's a lot of movies though. Like they hit you at the time when you're. I mean, I would even argue that there are some movies that we're going to talk about today. I'm like, oh, this is for children, and like when you're a child, yeah, it hits you, and it's like this is obviously a favorite. As an adult, sometimes it's like, ugh, like
Yeah.
If you're talking about Silver Bullet, we're going to disagree, my friend.
I'm not talking about Silver Bullet, so don't worry.
That's good to know.
Anyway, John Carpenter. Thank you for your service. I hope you listeners out there were able to find or rediscover an old favorite through the show. But let us move on to this episode's subject. Gavin, why don't you tell the lovely folks what we're talking about today?
Well, I noticed that this gentleman followed me on Twitter, and I was following him back, and I thought, well, he's literally written a book called Phases of the Moon, which is a book about the cultural history of the werewolf film. So who could be better to join us than Craig Ian Mann to talk about werewolves on film?
Yeah, it's kind of our last classic Universal monster, right? Well, I guess we haven't done...
We haven't done Frankie.
Oh, we haven't done Frankenstein. Yeah. But I'm, we've done zombies, we've done ghosts, we've done witches, we've done vampires, werewolves. It's natural. And Craig, I'm so excited to have you on. These episodes always kind of hit me in like really strange ways where I'm like, because I'm not really a scary movie guy, but then like I watch these and I'm like, there's so much like meta shit and I'm like, oh, it's scary for a reason. It's because real life is horrible and like a fucking horror.
I mean, I was surprised. I remember when we did Zombies on Film, which was 2 years ago, Louis came away with such an appreciation for it, specifically about not just the political messages, but the human messages about the way that people need each other and the way that people either band together or do not, or fail each other during these things.
Right.
And I actually think that Werewolves on Film runs closest to that area. It's usually more insular. It's usually not about a crowd. It's usually about like one specific person, but the way that they affect that crowd.
Right.
But I mean, we'll get into it in just a moment, but like that's how I was feeling watching these. I was like, surprisingly, I've seen a lot of werewolf movies, but surprisingly, I guess I had never thought of the deeper context. I really connected, Craig, with the chapters in your book about Reaganism, because obviously that's the era I was born in. And just the way that we changed the way that we talked about addiction and our bodies and disease and capitalism, and all in a very negative way. Louis and I are not Reagan fans. I'm going to go out on a limb to say.
Good. Because that would have been my French accent.
Yeah, exactly. And I wouldn't
so crazy you talk shit about my favorite president, Craig.
And no one would have blamed you, and no one would have listened to this episode. So like it's really cool to see that thought process written down and discussed and dug deeper, because it's a really disgusting time period in the United States, and it really affected our art and the way that we, pop culture perceive things and people.
People don't think of werewolf movies as being political in the same way they think of zombie movies as being political, because of Romero, I guess, and Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, or even vampires, I think. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book, because I think they are just as culturally significant as horror monsters, as zombies are, as vampires are, as Frankenstein's creature is, you know. So I'm really glad that side of it connected with you. Yeah.
We when we did vampires, we talked about the fact that clearly around the 80s and 90s, a lot of vampirism, especially when you get to like Interview with the Vampire and stuff, it becomes very clear how much of it is influenced by the AIDS epidemic and what was happening in the time period. And I agree. I think nobody's really thought about the way or written about the way that werewolves are very similar, because a lot of it ends up, especially in that time period, being about shame or like trying to hide the difference and what the effect it has on your body. And I don't know. It's
the transformation, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Transformation's the really important thing in the 80s, and it connects to several different contexts, I think.
And that's so fascinating. And I'd literally never seen anybody enter in through that angle. And it was kind of eye-opening, and it made me I'm gonna, hopefully this doesn't sound rude, it made me feel dumb that I had not made those connections before, because I like to think that I'm an insightful person, but apparently on a whole other level.
Werewolf movies have a bad reputation, and I think when you go into watching werewolf movies, the fact they have a bad reputation follows you into it, and you maybe immediately assume that there isn't a great deal there, unless we're talking about the canon, and the canon is basically 3, isn't that right? American Werewolf in London, The Howling, and Ginger Snaps.
Yeah,
maybe Dog Soldiers, but there aren't a lot of movies in the werewolf canon, quote unquote. So I think when you go and watch some of the more buried stuff, some of the, in cultural estimation, some of the stuff that's a little bit lower down, you may be followed by that shadow of werewolf movies are bad, right?
Yeah, right, totally.
Which I don't agree with, by the way, but, just as a cultural perception.
I'm shocked.
Wait, you didn't write a whole book about things you hate? Crazy.
Yeah.
The thing is,
you're clearly not American.
With the 5-star and 1-star review concept of this show, I really struggled with the 1-star, because I've watched so many of them, and I find something to like in all of them, and then I remembered the existence of the one
And I will say,
we'll leave that.
We've definitely given 1-star reviews to movies that we've also liked, but are not, that, because I think there's always something for somebody, and I don't think any movie gets made where it sets out, unless it's Sharknado. I don't think any movie sets out to be bad, but sadly, sometimes they end up that way.
The Citizen Kane of CGI cinema.
There you go. Okay, I'm already loving all this conversation. Let's keep it rolling, and let's get into the rewind. The word werewolf comes from the Old English word werewolf, lol. It's were means man, wolf literally means wolf. Hello, so werewolf. The term really isn't popularized until the 15th century, and that's when you see, and I didn't know this, apparently, as part of the witch trials, there was also fucking werewolf trials, or they were a part of that, and people were being accused of, being werewolves and eating babies and shit. And
very few confessed, but there were some confessions, which I think is even more bonkers.
Well, I mean, they were fucking peeling their skin off and pouring wax in their ears and shit. I would probably confess too. I'd be like, yes, bitch, it's me. I'm Shakira. The she-wolf is in the closet, okay?
By the 16th century, the secular courts had adopted Inquisition procedures to protect society from witches and werewolves. In 1532, judicial torture became the legal means to determine malevolent witchcraft and lycanthropy.
You can't actually prove the crime materially, so the only sure way of obtaining a verdict is a confession. And once you've got that idea into your head, the best way of obtaining a confession is to apply force.
The thing that we think about in Western culture, it's really just centered around in Europe. That's the idea. The term lycanthropy comes from ancient Greek. It's traced to the story of his name's King Lycion, whatever the fuck, of Arcadia. He's transformed into a wolf because he is Zeus even a fucking god? And makes him dinner, and it's a fucking baby or some shit. It's human flesh, and Zeus is disgusted, as he should be, and turns him into a wolf. So that's just the idea, lycanthropy, the idea that you can transform into a wolf, into a man.
It's become more of an unpopular term due to the turn to associating it more with the medical field now,
right?
Because it's becoming slightly more ableist than it was seen in the past.
I did find it really interesting, and I don't know, Craig, if you have any thoughts on this as someone who's native of Europe, but like the idea that, you know, when you think about back in the 16th, 17th century, I was reading a bunch of like scholarship about how, yeah, it probably makes sense that people were afraid of wolves because they were like the alpha predators of like the region. So this projection of fear is like going to just be put on these animals that are like, you know, eating sheep.
Montague Summers, a 19th century authority on occultism and the supernatural, aptly described what the wolf meant to medieval Europeans.
The distinctive features of the wolf are unbridled cruelty, bestial ferocity, and ravening hunger. He has something of the demon of hell. He's the symbol of night and winter, of stress and storm, the dark and mysterious harbinger of death.
There's different cultures around the world who, you know, if they don't have a wolf, they have like jaguars. They have like, there's always a beast that is scary. And certainly that even like in North America, we have gray wolves. And, you know, farmers always fucking kill their wolves. Like that's just like a part of the thing. And so like we project that fear onto these like creatures in the night who...
Yeah, there's also rabies.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is another thing that links into it. You know, there's a book by a guy called Ian Woodward called The Werewolf Delusion, where he argues that you can map accusations of werewolves to rabies outbreaks in Central Europe. So it's interesting.
So that's kind of just like a brief history of werewolf and like where that comes from. Obviously, you know, the tales of werewolfism, that's how like these myths come up, and people like, you know, the folk oral history of these things kind of trickle down through generations of people.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd be remiss if you didn't mention, and I'm going to fuck this up because I've never been very good at French, the Beast of Gévaudan, famous French werewolf outbreak attack that occurred in 1764 to about 1767. There was a study in 1987 that estimated that there were about 610 attacks resulting in 500 deaths and 49 injuries. 98 of the victims who were killed were partially eaten. It was blamed on a werewolf. Most descriptions of the period identified the beast as a striped hyena, wolf dog, or wolf dog hybrid, and it's one of the most famous historical cases of possible werewolf.
Moving ahead to werewolves on film, I found that the first time a werewolf is on film is a short silent film in 1913 called The Werewolf. It's about a Navajo woman who becomes a witch after she thinks her husband has left her, and she teaches her daughter how to turn into a wolf to seek vengeance. All of the copies of this were lost in a fire, so it's a lost film forever.
Craig, you were talking about that in your book, actually, about how it was very rooted in religion and imperialism. And I know,
yeah, it's a film for the white majority, essentially, and it's very much about controlling those forces that the white majority wants to control by first casting them as monsters and then kind of showing how they can be destroyed, right? So it's hard to analyze that movie because it's not, you know, we can't actually watch it, but there are plot synopses, there are a couple of stills still hanging around, and you can get the gist, basically. Yeah. You know, it's a threat to the white Christian majority, which is then quashed, essentially, which is very problematic.
Right.
It's a shame that the first werewolf movie is essentially racist.
It doesn't get better for the next couple ones, I'll say.
Right. I mean, because we'll see a lot of it's like, you know, the curse of the devil and a lot of spooky ooky gypsy folks who, like, you know, are the bad guys and who like mystically know the answer to all these things, but that's kind of where we're at. In 1935, Werewolf of London is made. There's, I guess, some like a little controversy about this film, or not controversy, but like Henry Hole was like, that design's stupid, I don't want to do that. And the movie was kind of like in limbo for a little bit. The studio decided to go with Hull's design. But fear not, because in 1941, when The Wolfman is made with Lon Chaney Jr., the director's design actually is used on that. And that, I don't know, what do you guys think? I think The Wolfman is what I saw for our Universal Monsters episode. I saw Werewolf of London for this, and it's again like, oh no, they went to Tibet where there's like crazy fucked up shit going on and little creatures bite you because you're finding flowers. I swear to God, people in the 30s were like, plants are fucking crazy. There's magic everywhere.
Yeah. They weren't just worried about plants. They were worried about foreigners, which is really bad. It's funny. This is another thing. I feel like this, hopefully this episode is not too much of just a full-on commercial for your book, but I find your book so fascinating. And it's written in such a way, and allow me to take a moment to just talk you up. I went to film school. I read a lot of academic books about film, and trust me, a lot of them are very, very dry. But one of the things I love about reading about cultural history film books is, especially the way you wrote it, is it's so readable. And so I think even if you're not a film student, this is an easy book to go up. If you're interested in the subject of werewolves on film or horror movies in general, like go out, buy Phases of the Moon. It's such an addicting read. And I mean, I finished it in like a day and a half.
Okay, speed reader.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's well worth it. And but anyways, I digress. You mentioned in the book, it's important to look at, and I've been on other podcasts where I talked about Universal Monsters, and I actually got in trouble because I was talking about how when you analyze these things, it's important to take in all of the information you can. And I talked about James Whale and queer readings of Frankenstein, and that was apparently not popular with the audience. I digress. In this, you talk about the writer of Werewolf of London and how, if you look at his later works, you see how incredibly Orientalist he truly was. And so it's not just Werewolf of London. It's not like an isolated incident that it's got a very heavy anti Asian.
No. So it was written by somebody who was American but raised in Japan, and I think a lot of his work, the Shanghai Gesture and so on and so forth, they're all very Orientalist, and they're all quite fearful of immigration and of the East and meeting the West. And Werewolf of London it's a very important werewolf movie because it's the first sound werewolf film, and it sets kind of the template going forward for how werewolf films will develop from that point. But I think in terms of its politics, it's not a film to be celebrated. I don't think it's very much about going to Tibet, bringing something evil back, that evil then having the having the potential to spread and contaminate, and
especially like high society kind of stuffy, like genteel.
Yes, yeah, that's the thing. He's definitely not, sounds ridiculous. He's definitely not a werewolf of the people.
No.
In fact, the lower classes in that movie are kind of presented as like comedy and humor, like no, he's messing up that room in there, and
it's funny what you say about the plant as well, because there is that line of dialogue when a really genteel English woman is shown a plant that's been imported to Britain. She says, "Fancy bringing a thing like that into Christian England."
Yes,
right.
And the thing with that is it's just an extension of the themes of the rest of the movie, that someone has gone to Tibet, brought something back, in this case werewolfism,
right?
And fancy bringing something like that into Christian England. It's very much about the fear of stepping outside of the Western world and what might happen to you if you do.
In this movie, they introduce the idea of things about werewolves that we will see over and over again. Obviously, the moon. Like, when the moon comes out, the transformation happens. Wolf's Bane, which, is all, like, there are movies that get really loosey-goosey with, like, how Wolf's Bane works or should affect a werewolf. I don't think Silver is introduced in this movie.
Ends up being the Wolfman. Though, some people claim loosely based on the whole Beast of Gévaudan thing, but it really seems like Silver is mostly a creation of Kurt Sadamark and his writing when it comes to the Wolfman.
Well, there's some history for it in kind of vampire legends and werewolf folklore, but in terms of solidifying it in the minds of people in pop culture, then yes, it's the top of the cane in the Wolfman. Yeah.
Kurt Sadamark saw Blade and was like, I'll do that.
Yeah. I wanted to mention Lon Chaney Jr. for a long time is the Wolfman. Like, so he's the only actor who reprised his character in all of the movies that would come after. And those, come out through the 40s, are very popular. In the 50s, the real world got really horrifying. World War II, the atomic bomb. There was a lot of things that shifted horror into kind of like B-side, B-status movies. It cemented its place in like as not like artistry and high filmmaking. And so a lot of the movies are kind of like schlocky, kind of sci-fi. I don't know if there's anything that stands out for you guys in this decade, but I wanted to mention 1957's I Was a Teenage Werewolf.
Which I think is one of the most important werewolf movies ever made, really, because it sets the template for that kind of teen wolf film that then recurs and recurs and recurs. I think without I Was a Teenage Werewolf, we don't get to Teen Wolf, we don't get to Ginger Snap, so it is a very important movie.
We don't get to Hello Twilight, the most iconic and important.
No, very true. But I also think The Werewolf from 1956 is a really interesting film as well, in terms of showing the kind of metaphorical adaptability of werewolves. It's a film where somebody is injected with radioactive wolf's blood as an attempt to inoculate him against radiation, something along those lines. Yeah. And basically it turns him into a werewolf mutant. It's so a completely different origin for where werewolves come from.
It's Spider-Man, kind of but werewolves.
Yes, exactly, yeah. And it's using werewolves for the atomic age, which I think is really interesting.
No, I was actually going to mention that too, because I actually really liked that movie because it presented such a different werewolf for its time period, and it gets rid of like almost everything that you're used to when it comes to werewolf. He's not, in a way, he's got the Incredible Hulk, like he gets angry and he turns into a werewolf. It has nothing to do with the moon. He can be killed like any other person. Right. There's no limitations to that. And like you were saying, the fear of the atomic age is such a big thing when it comes to 50s sci-fi and horror films. And to see it used in a way that early on, because I think, certain things come later with vampires and the sci-fi element, but for to be so early on for werewolves to be like, well, we could take this fear that people have had for a very long time and adapt it to the thing that they're afraid of currently. It's a kind of a brilliant use. And also Stephen Rich, who plays the werewolf, I gotta say is very good. There's a scene where he's like begging his family to leave him because he doesn't know what he'll do to them.
Please, darling, do as I say. If it should come back while you're still here, that's the way you'll always remember me. It would never be any good, even if I did come home.
And obviously it's a very similar thing you'll find throughout all werewolf movies. It's, the innocence, they don't want to hurt people. You mentioned that in the Wolfman series, as it goes on and becomes more of a metaphor for the U.S. during the war, like the Wolfman becomes more heroic because he's suddenly an American person out of his element in Europe as it goes along, and really the heroic element. And so you do end up seeing a lot of werewolves that are very sad about their curse, but I thought his particular take of being like, I have a wife and a child and like they need to get the fuck away from me because I will murder them if they don't. And I was particularly affected by his performance, and I've never seen him in another movie, and this was a very cheap film, so who knows what else he was ever in. But
it was the B picture for Earth versus the Flying Saucers.
Yeah.
So it played on the double bill with a film that's very much about the same kind of things. But yeah, I think he's incredibly tragic as someone who is just a sort of innocent victim of radioactive fallout. He kind of stands in for an American everyman who, if the bomb drops and you survive, this might be what happens to you afterwards,
Right.
About things happening that are beyond your control. And I think the really sad thing about that 1956 movie is that it is all completely beyond his control. He's in a coma when they inject that thing into him.
He didn't ask for it at all. Yeah.
And I think the kind of Incredible Hulk thing, as you called it, that he turns into a werewolf when he gets angry, is also very interesting because it's relating to that idea of the bomb, and all it takes is for somebody to hit sort of fever pitch and press the button and it's all over. So kind of divorcing it from the moon and connecting it to anger and ill feeling, I think works really well with that metaphor as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess we like really skipped over, in the Wolfman, Lon Chaney, his what's his name? His name is like
Lawrence
Talbot.
Talbot. Yeah. He is also similarly just he's sad. He is like this fucking, he's like, I'm going to murder this woman that I love. And like, it's all very like, you don't know who I really am. And it's kind of this like, inner struggle of, you know,
the whole theme of those movies is noble sacrifice, that you give up everything to protect other people. You know, he's constantly begging for people to kill him,
right, yes,
and then very, very sad when he comes back to life, because in the Wolfman movies, as soon as you remove the silver, that person will rise from the grave. So yeah, it's a very tragic film about a man constantly making sacrifices for other people, which is why he ends up being the hero, I think, and why he is one of the only actors who reprises the role.
Yeah.
Because he's kind of centralized as the only kind of American monster in those films.
That's a good point too, because he really becomes the literal face of that, whereas you can kind of slap the Frankenstein which is not to say that anybody was as good as Karloff, in just my opinion, as the monster, but like you could kind of slap the Frankenstein makeup on, and they tried with Dracula. They actually had Lon Chaney Jr. play Dracula in Son of Dracula. He was Count Alucard, Dracula backwards. Very, very smart.
Clever.
And but yeah, he sort of becomes the face of that. And I've read other film scholars and listened to other film podcasts where people have really been sort of unkind about Lon Chaney Jr.'s performance as Talbot. And
I think he's a great actor.
I do
too. He's basically got one mode,
yes.
but he's very, very good.
Yep.
He's very good at that one mode, which is tragic and suffering.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
And
in like, not to bring his personal life into it, but that's how he was as a person. He unfortunately died of alcoholism, and but I think he's really fantastic in the Wolfman movies. So thank you for because I started to feel a little like, I'm like, is it me? Am I?
Well, he gets a lot of flack for the Inner Sanctum films during the 1940s, because he's playing professors and professional people who are not kind of blue collar, and everybody associated Lon Chaney Jr. with blue collar roles. But again, those characters suffer; they're taken through the ringer, and I don't think that anybody could play that as well as Lon Chaney could. But,
yeah.
You wouldn't want to run away with a murderer, would you?
Oh, Larry, you're not. You know you're not.
I killed Baylor. I killed Richardson. If I stay around here much longer, you can't tell who's going to be next.
In 1961, we get Hammer's The Curse of the Werewolf, which I thought was a very bonkers movie. I was like, we are going through time quickly, okay? And this little Spanish bastard, he is cursed, okay? I was like, they are taking, and I say Spanish bastard like literally, like the whole thing is like, he is a bastard, so he is cursed by the devil. He was born on Christmas Day, which is bad, I guess. I was like, what the fuck is going on? I will say that I love the way that this Wolfman looks. I think
the real shame of the movie is that he's in 10 minutes of it. Like by the time the monster shows up, it's like, oh, that's right. Like we were gonna get a full werewolf at some point in the movie.
One of the greatest torch-bearing mob scenes in any film.
Oh, that snap zoom when he's on the tower and it like goes from the mob to him is one of my favorite. It's funny. I will say Oliver Reed is one of my favorite actors who I'm not sure is a good actor, but he like makes love to the camera. He is so sexy in everything that he does that it's impossible to take your eyes off him. So like every Hammer movie where Oliver Reed shows up, I am down for.
Like I'm kind of getting through like 60s, 70s, because I think the golden age is really the 80s. But, you know, I'd be remiss to not mention in the 70s, there is a Spanish series that kicks off, Hombre Lobo,
yes.
Which I think spans 12 films, which is very interesting. Also, I saw 1974's The Beast Must Die. And yes. I was like, okay, the 70s were alive and well.
I fucking love The Beast Must Die. The Beast Must Die is a party film through and through. Let me tell you, it is a parlor mystery, and I will say, I love. And maybe I'm in the minority. I love a good werewolf mystery. And I mean, we have games based on that nowadays, you know, like people play like who is the werewolf. But I love when you have like 7-8 characters in a room and it's like one of you is a werewolf. Like,
right.
Nothing will ever beat the werewolf break.
The werewolf break.
A film that literally stops to ask you to consider who the werewolf is before you find out the werewolf itself is actually an Alsatian spray painted black.
Correct.
I mean, what more could you want?
This is the werewolf break. Have you guessed who the werewolf is?
I know that you guys really like this movie, but it's got some of the worst day for night shooting I've ever seen.
Horrible, genuinely horrible.
Like,
I did not like this movie. I did not like this movie. Let me be clear. Gavin was sold on it. I was like, send her back.
I have a specific just a specific love of that sort of camp. Anytime that you get the scene where they're passing the silver candlestick around because Peter Cushing has told them that even a molecule of silver will reveal the werewolf, and they go to hand it to Charles Gray, and he just goes, "Oh, I loathe party games. What am I supposed to do?" Like, it's just, yes. Like,
but also, this is the movie where they're like, let's just make some shit up. Well, there was no wolfsbane in the air, so ha ha ha. It didn't really... Actually,
playing some fast and loose with some rules.
Very loosey-goosey.
It's a really interesting time for British horror, this, because Amicus and Hammer are scrambling for what's going to sell, and so you've got Hammer doing things like Dracula AD 1972, bringing Dracula into the 70s.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can feel all of that energy running through this movie. It's also interesting. They said werewolf, but make it just a wolf. This is not like Wolfman situation. It's. Mm-hmm.
And that's always my least favorite.
Alsatian.
Yeah, it's an Alsatian.
You prefer full wolf?
No, my least favorite type of werewolf is when it's full wolf. Yeah. Even though there are some movies I enjoy, but I'm always just in my heart of hearts a little disappointed when I'm like, oh, it's just a wolf.
I'd say because on one hand, it means that there's none of the awesome special effects we're all looking for in a werewolf movie. And on the other hand, those wolves are quite often not treated very well.
I know.
So we'll talk about Wolfen in a moment.
Well, at the start of Cry of the Werewolf, 1944 film, there's a wolf snarling when the title card comes up, and you can see that wolf has got rubber bands wrapped around its mouth to make it snarl. It's grim.
This is also the first movie that I saw in the timeline of dogs fighting werewolves in movies. Like, that happens a couple more times, and I'm always just like, I don't want to know how they got the dogs to fight with them, and it probably wasn't great. And so, attached on to like the idea that like some movies just like had, back in the day, they didn't give a fuck. I mean, even as late as like 10 years ago, they were not fucking treating animals right in films, and it makes me feel not great.
I will say before we move in, because I know you're like speeding towards the 80s, and you're right, like the 80s is really sort of transformative, pun intended, for the werewolf film. But I do want to also give a plug. I'm glad you brought up Cry of the Werewolf, and I do want to give a plug for 1961's Lycanthropus, which I didn't know about until your book as well, which is an Italian film, and is very much a like who is the Wolfman movie, and then like midway through you find out. But it also starts in Europe, this sort of sexual nature with werewolves in a way that we pretty much go from I was a teenage werewolf till nothing till the 70s. And so like during that time period, what's filling in is these European films that sort of delve more into the psychosexual nature of werewolves.
Yeah. So you've got the stuff in the 70s from Europe, which is largely about the sexual revolution and the kind of the tensions between sex and love and where those two things sit. And you've got a lot of werewolves that can only be saved by love, and any lustful behavior is something to be punished. So The Curse of the Werewolf, for example, or a lot of the Waldemar Daninsky movies, the Paul Naschy movies in Spain. But you've also got the American films in the 70s as well. The Boy Who Cried Werewolf and Werewolves on Wheels. And The Werewolf of Washington, three of what I think are the most like obviously politically engaged werewolf movies ever made. Even if they are, admittedly, somewhat daft, they are very, very, very interesting on a political level. And actually, I think Werewolves on Wheels is a really, really serious film.
Yes.
Despite the fact that it was marketed as this kind of exploitation B movie, it's really bleak.
I
really did either of you watch that one?
I did. I was going to say, I think the thing that maybe holds it back a tiny bit is the cheapness of it, which is it has very lofty goals but the stuff that works, a lot of it comes from, what's like, because you mentioned that the opening sequence is almost shot for shot Easy Rider.
It's really nihilistic, isn't it? Because you could read it one way and when it's telling you to conform, or you could kind of read it that it's about the fact that both this gang, so it's about a sort of werewolf biker gang, but they only become a werewolf biker gang because they're cursed by a bunch of satanic monks. And I think the film ultimately doesn't like either of those two groups. It's kind of, and this is one of the reasons why I like Halloween Kills, because I think it does something similar. It basically comes down to the point that America is tearing itself apart and there is no answer.
I mean, that's bleak as shit.
Yeah.
So.
And also our reality. I do. The Boy Who Cried Werewolf, I did actually really like as well too, and that's another. But I love that I was not expecting it to take its. It's called The Boy Who Cried Werewolf, and it's basically The Boy Who Cried Wolf. I was not expecting it to take it to that level, that it's literally like a child running around telling everybody, hey, my dad's a werewolf, he's murdering people, and everybody's like, oh, you're such a cute kid. Yeah, kids, whatever. And so that also has a pretty bleak ending, and one of those endings where when it stops, you're kind of finally like, oh, what do I have to make of that? Like, what, like.
Well, I think all three of those films in the 70s have got extremely bleak endings.
Yeah.
Despite even the Werewolf of Washington, which is for the most part, for the most part, a comedy, but the end of it is really, really bleak. And that's why I think it kind of sits with The Last House on the Left and Texas Chainsaw and Night of the Living Dead. They've got werewolves in them, so they're not as well respected. But I think they've got similar things to say, around like the collapse of the family, kind of the counterculture.
Yeah, I mean, that was like the Vietnam War going on. Like that was, the horror was real.
Commander Salmon tells me that in your case, or let's say that in this case, the existence of a werewolf has not been verified. So how could you be a werewolf?
Well, sir...
Where's the ball?
Okay, so I've heard, and I want to hear what you guys think, 1981 is the greatest year for the werewolf movie.
Yeah. I was going to say, I feel like that's hard to argue.
We get The Howling Wolfen and, of course, the classique American Werewolf in London.
And Full Moon High. Let's not forget Full Moon High. Larry Cohen's weird teen wolf comedy.
Okay,
doesn't quite sit with the others. But yeah,
and also people are not. There are some folks who say Wolfen is not a werewolf movie,
including me, which is why it's not in the book.
But I will say, An American Werewolf in London, I had never seen, and I was like, talk about a film who fucking sticks the landing. Visually, it's stunning. The story is like pretty like tight and compact. It's kind of very I love the idea that there's a fucking like little town out there that's like, shut the fuck up about the werewolves. Like, don't talk about who the fuck are you Americans? Get the fuck out of here. Like, don't ask about the bloody star on the wall. Okay, like we don't talk about that. I love the American Werewolf in London.
I will say that is a film that as the years go on, and this is an unpopular opinion, I'm aware, my appreciation for it kind of wanes. I like the special effects, obviously. I mean, it's like impossible not to like the special effects in that movie. They're bonkers. It's so good. I think it's a very confused film in terms of like, is it funny? Does that movie make me laugh when it's supposed to? I don't know.
I don't think to me, and I know people describe it as like this horror comedy. I think it's like, to me, it feels more like horror realism. Like these are just normal guys. And so they are going to like fuck around with each other in a way that like to the parallel of An American Werewolf in Paris, where like those are not real human beings. Like, holy shit. Yeah. Like these are not guys who are palling around. This is like what some fucking studio executive thinks guys who are friends talk to each other about. Like, and so I wasn't like, LOL, but like, yeah, it's like, motherfucker, why are we out here in the fucking rain walking around? And like, that to me, it felt grounded in reality.
I think it's something that both American Werewolf and The Howling do. They kind of dispense with a lot of the gothic trappings of the previous films, I think. And it's about ordinary people being confronted with the absurd. Right. I think that's where a lot of the humor in American Werewolf comes from, is that, what do you do when you realize that you are becoming a werewolf and that makes no fucking sense?
Right. And also like the idea that like so is this also the movie that introduces the idea that if you get killed by a werewolf, you become an undead revenant or some shit?
Yeah, this is this is that.
Because that kind of like also we see later in life, and it's like, well, I can't die, quote unquote, until like we kill the guy who whatever, but like I loved him going to the like porn theater or whatever. And like, you know, the idea of talking to his friend being like, in the ways that the Wolfman is about, like, you know, someone kill me, please. It's like the reality in the 80s and being like, could you kill yourself? Could you kill yourself? And your best friend saying like, man, I'm really sorry, but you need to kill yourself.
Yeah, it needs to stop.
Because
the victims of your carnivorous lunar activities.
Yeah, and I mean, that's an interesting start to what people often refer to as the me generation. You know, the people born in the 80s, born out of the 80s, because it's like he's neither enjoying his time as a werewolf, which you will see later, I feel, in other films, nor is he like ready to be like, well, gotta end it, you know?
Right. And especially it's like, I love the idea of like, no, I can control who I am. I am in charge of my body. I have like autonomy over who I am and who I get to be. And I am the one in charge. It is about, you know, what I can do to, you know, beat this thing. Like, what is the cure? All this. And it's like, no, bud, like, look at my fucked up face.
What shall I do?
Suicide.
You must take your own life.
That's easy for you to say. You're already dead.
This movie wins the inaugural Academy Award for Best Makeup.
Yes.
Which I did not know, which is very cool. And I like that. Just like, what, Gavin? What,
I was
Gavin?
just thinking to myself, I bet you Joe Dante's always like, fuck you, whenever that gets...
Yeah, because Rick Baker was supposed to make the Werewolves for The Howling and then ended up going and doing American Werewolf because he'd promised John Landis he was going to do it years earlier. Although I really, really like the Werewolves in The Howling.
Oh, I think the Werewolves...
More so than the Werewolf in American Werewolf in London. I love the Werewolves in The Howling.
The Howling contains maybe my favorite scene with a werewolf ever, which is when she's looking through the files and the werewolf just takes the file from her. It's the best. It's literally the best thing I've ever seen in a werewolf movie, because it's just like, I'll be taking this. Thank you.
I love that transformation scene because it's all shot in Joe Dante's office because they've run out of money. And it's all shot in close up, and it's got that great line, I want to give you a piece of my mind, and Eddie Quist pulls a bullet out of his own head before the transformation starts. Yeah, I love that. The Howling is, for me, not... Well, it kind of ties to my favourite werewolf ever made, but I think it's werewolf film ever made, but I think it's the greatest werewolf film ever made.
It's funny, and this might be apocryphal, but I believe that was an improv by Robert Picardo as well. I'll give you a piece of my mind, and who apparently was very upset about it. Like, he was like, I've been on Broadway, and I just went to film school. And I'm a fucking rapist werewolf in a movie, but his performance is really great, and he's just a fantastic.
And then he ends
actor.
up being in pretty much every Joe Dante movie. So
yeah,
you know,
and he's fantastic.
It's the start of a wonderful friendship.
And it's also, so that's all 1981, and like it's the start of a Renaissance golden age for werewolf movies. I have a list here of things that I saw. I'm sure you guys can jump on in. Gavin texted me specifically. He said, you need to watch Monster Squad, because I just love Monster Squad.
I do love Monster Squad.
And Monster Squad, I was going online, seeing what people were saying about movies, and someone was like, Monster Squad, unfortunately, isn't scary or funny. And I'm like, this is for children.
Right.
I was like, and it is delightful. Disney Channel original movies, Wishes, okay? But
well, because
some people really don't understand that whole period in the mid-80s when there were horror films that were being made for family viewing.
Yes.
Gremlins.
This
Gremlins
is like a perfect. This
Squad.
is a perfect movie for like 13-year-olds, you know, and like because it's cool. Like these kids are cool. They're like don't understand like what sex is. When that bitch, she was like, "What? I'm a virgin." Yeah, I was like, "No." I know. And then they make that little baby girl do the thing. I was like, oh my God.
And one thing I love about the werewolf in Monster Squad, we don't have to talk about it too much because it's really not a movie specifically about a werewolf, but I think he's maybe one of the saddest screen werewolves. He's absolutely against his will, constantly screaming at people to lock him up. If people would just listen to him, the scene where he calls the main character's father to warn him, he's like, Dracula's gonna kill your kid, as he's like spitting out mucus and turning into a werewolf. But also I recently watched it because I wanted to rewatch it for this with people, and they were affronted by the fact that you could blow this werewolf up and still not kill him, but it had to be a silver bullet. And I was like, no, there are rules.
Yeah, and that's
how it works.
And that's like the best part. I remember when I watched it, like at the beginning they're like, what's the second way to kill a werewolf? And it's like, oh wait, there's no fucking way. And so the callback of the blowing him up and then him coming together and they're like, no bitch, that there is no way. Also the iconic line, the Wolfman has nards, like iconic.
Oh, absolutely.
That's canon.
Kick him in the nards! Kick him in the nards! He doesn't have nards! Do it! Wolfman's got nards! Come on! Come on!
Craig, you seem to have a lot of feelings about Silver Bullet.
I do. I mean, I love Silver Bullet. I think American Werewolf and The Howling kind of kick off the body horror stuff in the 80s. So like that kind of the big monstrous werewolf, the horrible transformations. And I think that does, as Gavin was saying at the start, it kind of relates to the kind of Reagan era's obsession with bodies and disease. And I think there's a lot to counterbalance that in terms of how those films deal with mental health. So you've got the ghouls coming back to say you need to commit suicide, you need to kill yourself, and David in that film is much more happy to accept that he's insane, than turning into a monster, which I think is really interesting in terms of thinking about mental and physical health in that era. But Silver Bullet for me is the quintessential kind of deconstruction of the Reagan era through a werewolf movie. I mean, there are many films many horror films in the 80s that are kind of anti-Reagan. In fact, a lot,
right?
But in terms of
deservedly so,
the werewolf film that deconstructs the Reagan era, Silver Bullet is by far. How much do you do spoilers on this show?
We can do spoilers,
but also like this movie came out in 1984. Relax.
Yeah, you've had time.
1985. Yeah.
You've had time.
But yeah, so this is a film in which a small, quiet town, Tarker's Mills, Maine, is attacked by a werewolf who turns out to be their local priest.
Yes, and I fucking knew it from the beginning. I said, there's something wrong with him.
I mean, anytime you cast that actor whose name escapes me at the moment, but
Everett McGill.
Anytime you cast him, it's sort of like casting Ed Harris in a movie. It's like, oh, he's the villain.
Yeah, and I think the great thing about it is that the town divides in terms of how they want to deal with this. Some of them go for kind of mob justice, others put it in the hands of the police, and ultimately no one is able to solve this problem except
the kids,
a young child, because the young child kind of exists outside of this society and this, the kind of conservative rules of the society that everybody else exists in, and he's the only one who can destroy it. And I think the greatest scene in that movie is that dream sequence where the whole town transforms in the church while Amazing Grace is being sung by the congregation.
Yeah.
It's just one of the kind of greatest deconstructions of America in a sequence I think I've ever seen.
Reverend, he was torn apart!
No! We briefly talked about Teen Wolf, which I think kind of like launches werewolves into, younger popular imagination. This is a friendly wolf. This is a wolf that's not, murdering. This is a wolf because his dad is a wolf and we're just werewolves. And
sometimes it skips a generation.
Yeah, we're growing up, and he becomes cool and popular. And so in Teen Wolf, it's literally just like he can. I don't want to say Hulk out, but like he can transform at will. The most interesting thing about Teen Wolf to me is the idea that there's the girl who's clearly in love with him, but when he becomes, he finds out he's this teen wolf, he can use it like whenever he wants, and then realizes, kind of like, oh, do I even like this part of me? Is this like the real me? And there's a moment when she says, she's like, I'll go to the prom with you if it's you and not the wolf. And he's like, the classic teen YA angst of like, do I pick popularity or am I going to stay true to myself? And then also just finding the balance of like, obviously the wolf is a part of him. And the dad, bitch, Spider-Man, hello, with power comes responsibility. I feel like that is said in this movie, right?
An explanation is probably long overdue.
An explanation? Jesus Christ, Dad, an explanation? Look at me. Look at you.
It's not as bad as it looks.
Wait a minute, Dad. I mean, you knew about this? You knew about this and you didn't tell me?
I was hoping I wouldn't have to. Sometimes it skips a generation. I was hoping it would pass you by.
Well, Daddy, it didn't pass me by. It landed on my face.
It's a movie about what it means to be a man.
Yes.
It's about masculinity. And I think it's specifically about masculinity in the 80s, but it extends beyond that, I think. Specifically about toxic masculinity, I think.
And you mentioned in your book, it does a really good job until like maybe the last 10 minutes of rejecting a lot of that.
The problem with Teen Wolf and Teen Wolf 2 is they have to win at the end.
They have to win, exactly.
Because it's a Hollywood.
You can't have the Rocky
teen
ending
comedy
where they refuse to wolf out and then they lose and then everybody would turn against them. And I understand that, but you're right. It creates kind of a mixed message and all of that.
Because the film says one thing and then the ending say, but you still need to be good at sport.
Right.
So it's they're interesting endings.
When really the audience just is interested in surfing on top of a van.
Hello. I was like, the speaker must be bumping for him to be, doing Surfing USA. I also wanted to mention Company of Wolves, which is, I don't know, a fucking fever dream of like theater and film. I really liked Company of Wolves. It's weird because like it kind of vacillates between like there is some like aggressive, like the transformations, like it's really gnarly when the guy's like ripping his face off. That's what I also like. Sometimes the body transforms into the wolf, other times fucking bursts out.
The beast tears out. No metaphor there.
Right, no.
Well, I think the thing is, like, for a film that's so like narratively is all over the place and very surreal, I think thematically it's very straightforward. It's about sex, blood, and changing into something monstrous, essentially. So I think it's very mid-80s in that regard.
Zooming a little ahead to the 90s, we get Wolf with Jack Nicholson in 1994. We breezed over that in our Michelle Pfeiffer episode.
That's because I was the only one who'd watched it.
Well, guess what, bitch? I watched this for this episode. Jack Nicholson
a werewolf
pissing,
movie that's really about publishing.
In the 90s, the book publishing world was cutthroat and high stakes, okay?
Yeah, the only way you could get ahead was by marking your territory literally.
Pissing on James Spader.
Which
on his shoes specifically.
I was going to say, based on what we know about James Spader, probably into it. Just
well, there is that. I think Jack Nicholson's a very good Wolfman, is what I'm going to say.
Oh, he was born to be a werewolf, Jack Nicholson. The first werewolf film I ever saw.
Really?
Oh, really?
The first feature-length werewolf movie I ever saw when I was 9 or 10 years old. A friend of mine had it on VHS along with Bram Stoker's Dracula and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, I think.
You talked about... Yeah.
Did you go to Gavin's house? Like, Jesus. Like...
And I watched Wolf. I then borrowed the tape. I didn't give it back for about 10 years.
Wow.
And it was Wolf that kind of started my obsession with watching as many werewolf movies as possible. So
very cool.
I do love that movie.
I like the drawback on the makeup, and I like that. I mean, part of me thinks that it is just a Hollywood, like, it's Jack Nicholson. You want him to look like Jack Nicholson, sort of. But I like that because that feels, and I know it's during that cycle when everybody was doing, you have Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula and Kenneth Branagh's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And so it's definitely part of that, like, return to the Gothic sort of.
It's like prestige horror.
Yeah.
But I do like that. I will say, though, and one of the things I like about Jack Nicholson in this movie, and I know I'm in the minority of this, I love The Shining, but my problem with The Shining is that he's never not insane. He seems crazy from the moment that, one of the things I like about Wolf is Jack Nicholson is actually giving a performance that you believe that he's going from slightly more mild mannered to something more animalistic.
We all need some money.
I've got about $1,000 in my wallet. How much would you like to borrow? $5? $10?
Cut the bullshit and give me the wallet.
This movie also introduces, like, hold on, I'm a wolf now and I can smell things. And my senses are heightened. It's crazy. I was like, okay, fun with that.
Well, there's some of that sensory stuff in Teen Wolf.
I was going to say,
but it's the fact that it's at the other end of the spectrum, isn't it? Where you've got a teenager turning into a werewolf versus a guy who's nearing retirement. Right. It's kind of giving him back his virility and his youth.
Right.
And again, it's about that toxic masculinity stuff, but specifically here, framed in the kind of corporate world. You know, do you piss on James Spader's shoes, or do you try and work things out in a little bit less of a violent way?
I watched Bad Moon from '96, which the opening sequence, I was like, okay, here we fucking go. I was like, imagine just being attacked by a werewolf like mid-coitus.
Yeah.
That just seems bad. Not great.
I love the werewolf in that movie. I love the werewolf in that film.
Okay, so did I. This is another area where I've read a lot of negative stuff about, and I think mostly it's the real quick bad CG transformation that occurs very late in the film.
Oh yeah, but for the rest of the film, they've got this amazing animatronic werewolf.
So good. And I do agree with the director of that movie. It's a werewolf movie from a point of view that you don't get, and obviously like the book that it's based off of is written specifically from the dog Thor's perspective, and the movie does away with a lot of that, but I think it's kind of a love story between a werewolf and a dog.
I know. That dog fighting him in the end.
Yeah,
rough.
That looks rough.
It also continues that thing from The Boy Who Cried Werewolf, which then comes back in several later films, which is about kind of older werewolves passing down the curse potentially to younger children. About those kind of generational inheritance of awful behavior, basically.
And Michael Paré, who I think he does a lot in that movie, especially because Muriel Hemingway is not doing a lot in that movie, and I don't want to I actually kind of like.
I'm a
Muriel
lawyer,
Hemingway.
Actually. So
yes, exactly.
Think about that.
Exactly. That was a line for line reading. You perfect.
Thank you.
Don't you know anything about werewolves?
I know you turn into one if you get bit by one, but the full moon part. Maybe there's different kinds of werewolves, but it's been my experience that anyone will do the trick. Werewolf-wise.
Have you ever met a werewolf?
I've been acquainted with a few in my time.
It's wild that the next year An American Werewolf in Paris comes out, and they are tonally so different. Not that they need to be, but American Werewolf in Paris said, okay, rock and roll is bad, leather on everyone, jumping off the Eiffel Tower, and no. And on top of that, the werewolves look like shit. They said CGI, here we come.
Big CG energy.
Were-rats is what the vibe.
But the first sort of organized criminal werewolf pack.
Oh right, yes, which we're gonna see again, like an underworld. A lot of cabals of werewolves who just want to fuck.
They're also implicitly, but pretty obviously implicitly, neo-Nazis.
Yes. Yeah. All with the shaved head, all with that. And it's funny you mentioned this too in your book, and I'm just going to keep saying that. That's going to be my catchphrase for the episode, about how it's very funny that it's an American film where it's neo-Nazis are a European problem. Read the room, guys.
But it's really close in proximity to American History X and Pariah and all those kind of 90s movies that are dealing with neo-Nazism in America, and then American Werewolf in Paris just skinheads are in France, don't worry about it.
Exactly.
And they're werewolves.
Poor Julie Delpy.
It's interesting that they are quite clearly fascist in one way or another, but who they want to kill is Americans.
Right. Yes. Moving on. In 2000, we get Ginger Snaps, which fucking rocked my world.
I agree with you that academically it's probably one of the most discussed horror movies, but I think it deserves its place. I genuinely really like that movie, and I know that it is maybe overexposed when it comes to academic readings and all the thought that's been put into it. But I don't know. I think it kind of deserves that.
I mean, I'll say I never heard of this fucking movie before, so it's a tiny little Canadian movie, but I was okay, Jennifer's Body. A lot of the movies that we've seen, obviously, were about the nature of men and the wild, the lust, and all that. And putting that through the feminist lens, this movie is very clear what it's going for. And I will say, the wig parade in this movie is a little rough, but I really enjoyed it. They said no CGI, so we're doing a lot of
actual makeup transformations,
slimy, but getting into the aughts, it was the fight between there was indie stuff, but then there was also more blockbustery stuff. In 03 we got Underworld, and I don't know how many other movies they made of that. I will say Underworld was the girlie that said, lichens. Those werewolves, we don't have those. They're lichens, actually.
Well, that's. I mean, I will say during the 2000s, it just sort of does feel like there's a big rejection of like the term we're like, we're not gonna do that, and so like you also get things like Skinwalkers, which is the world's. Yeah. I don't know if it's the world's longest CW pilot or the world's shortest movie. Like,
but it kind of fits with zombies as well. You know, the munchers or whatever.
Trying
to find another way of referring to classic monsters, which I don't really see why people need to do.
Ghouls.
Yeah.
But like in 2003, 2004, like that was just the vibe, like edgy fucking a fairy tale shit. So we get Van Helsing. If I'm missing anything, let me know. But I want to jump ahead. I mean, 2008, like Twilight, trash, but you know, again, like really popularized fucking vampires and werewolves. These werewolves are Native American werewolves, and they are just wolves, but enormous. And that's their thing. And also they can smell babies or some shit. I don't know. In 2010, they tried to reboot The Wolfman with Benicio del Toro. This movie, I was like...
Which I think is better than people give it credit for.
I think this movie, I was like, they brought Emily Blunt in just to be fucked by everybody. They said the old man wants to fuck her, the brother, the other brother. I was like, name a woman. Name a woman.
My dear fellow, I wish I could tell you that the tragedy that has beset your life was over. But I'm afraid the darkest hours of hell lie before you. I don't think they'll kill you, Lawrence. But they will blame you. The beast will have its day. The beast will out.
And like now we're getting to like kind of very recent history things that have come out. I saw Late Phases, Wolf Cop, which I thought was very stupid and fun. The only time I've seen a wolf dick transformation is what I'll say.
And don't you feel better?
I feel great about it. Great about it. The filmmaker said, you know what? His dick needs to explode out of his pants. And I said, wow, that is commitment. I wish I would have seen Howl, 2015's Howl. I saw the trailer and I was like, this looks fun. I love a good spooky train movie.
Howl is great in a way, like fits that sort of like people trapped in an area and then and not necessarily like who is the werewolf because they know what the werewolves are. I liked particularly your analysis, Craig, about classism in it, which I mean I think is pretty clear, but also like you went really deep into it in a movie that most people I think probably haven't seen because it is such a small film, or at least in the US. I don't know how well it played overseas, but
it's interesting, isn't it? Because it got quite a few festival screenings and then just kind of
went away,
plateaued. But it's an interesting film in terms of kind of putting a microcosm of British class society in a train and then attacking them by having them be attacked by werewolves who are kind of this emaciated, underfed breed of werewolves who live out in the forest, slowly turning into wolf mutant creatures,
and much more human looking than a lot of other werewolf movies.
I mean, I think that's maybe why it hasn't got as good a reputation as it might have had, is that people like a snouty werewolf, right? But the werewolves in Howl are very much designed to fit with the theme in mind, I think, rather than just to kind of entertain on a horror level.
It seems,
but yeah, that's a really interesting film that not enough people have seen.
It seems like, after Twilight ended and Wolfman really didn't take off, werewolves have kind of like lost popularity. Werewolves Within came out this year, which was like fun. Felt very, the humor is very like of the time. It's very specific. But like there hasn't been really any, unless, am I missing anything?
I would disagree. Yeah.
Okay.
Is Gavin going to disagree for me?
The other ones I wanted to mention were the fourth wave feminist werewolf movies that you bring up in your book, the When Animals Dream, Wildling, and there was one other that I can't think of at
Female
the moment.
Werewolf is the name of that film.
Yeah, Female Werewolf. Yeah. I unfortunately didn't get to watch a lot of them, but I watched Wildling because I actually just really love Liv Tyler and Brad Dourif, but so it was easy sell for me, and I really liked it, and I was shocked to go on Letterboxd and find it absolutely savaged by most of the people who have seen it, which makes me really bummed out because I think it's actually a very good, and in a way, like you mentioned about, I love Ginger Snaps, but you're right, in the end of Ginger Snaps, the message gets a little mixed because it's about suppressing the beast, and like if the metaphor is, you know, when you mature
into a woman,
then the suppression fights against that, and Wildling's message is like, no, you know what?
And the same thing with When Animals Dream as well. I think they're very keen on the kind of she-wolves at the center of the narrative being allowed to be werewolves. It's a kind of sense of emancipation instead of monstrosity. You know, there are forces that are trying to force them to suppress their instincts, and they fight against that. And the films kind of endorse that rebellion, which I think the reading of Ginger Snaps in the book is potentially the most contentious part of the book, because people do love Ginger Snaps, and I love it too. I just kind of see some things in it that I think have been done a little bit better in movies since. But the interesting thing about Wildling is that a lot of those reviews are based on people reading it as anti-feminist, which I don't necessarily understand. I mean, did they watch the same film that I did?
Yeah, I don't quite get it either.
Actually, I think there's a little bit of a kind of a werewolf renaissance going on.
Okay.
But a lot of these are quite low budget films that kind of get seen on the festival circuit and maybe don't break out to a huge audience. So there's a Canadian film called Bloodthirsty, which is really, really good and really worth watching. And although I didn't get time, well, I actually hadn't seen it when I submitted the book, but it's another film that continues that kind of fourth wave feminist approach to the werewolf. There is a movie called Blood Moon, which was part of the Blumhouse Into the Dark series. That's really interesting. That's really interesting because it uses the werewolf as a race metaphor, which you don't see very often in cinema.
Right.
There is a French film called Teddy. There's werewolves within. There is the new Wolfman film with Ryan Gosling. There's a really great Bloody Disgusting article that came out recently about werewolves making a comeback. And I hope that does continue. There's quite a few of them around at the moment. Whether that continues apace, I don't know.
Right.
I mean, I hope so.
Will Kate Beckinsale work again? We shall see.
But I do like that they're all doing very interesting things in terms of, you know, some of them are kind of using the werewolf in a feminist way, and some of them are about race, and some of them are about, like Werewolves Within is about, again, like Silver Bullet, communities that tear themselves apart because they can't agree. And
that shit was fully Trumpism, like reaction, like miscommunication, like being a good neighbor. Like imagine us just like being kinder to each other.
And there is,
and without spoiling anything, also it's about not recognizing your true enemy.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one more before we move into our picks that I do want to give a shout out to, which you mentioned very briefly in your book because I'm not even sure it was out yet, but the Brazilian film Good Manners.
Yeah, Good Manners is really, really interesting. Yeah, I think the thing is with that movie is the less said the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's quite long and it's quite cerebral, but it's very much worth tracking down.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's fantastic, and I highly recommend watching. I watched it last year, knowing very little going in, except for the fact that there was that this was the genre, and and then maybe I was wrong. So
excellent. Well, Good Manners, Good Neighbors. Here we are, werewolf movies in 2021. Let's get into. Let's do our 1-star reviews first. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, Craig, as our guest, you have the honor of going first and telling us about what, in your opinion, is your 1-star review werewolf movie.
Well, I found this really hard because, as I said at the start, I've seen a lot of werewolf movies. Some of them aren't what generally people would consider to be great. But I tend to see something in almost every werewolf movie I watch because I kind of set out to study them. And so I'm not always necessarily thinking about kind of quality judgments. Right. Sometimes I'm just thinking about what is the theme here? Do I think that's interesting? However, the worst werewolf movie I've ever seen, and perhaps one of the worst films I've ever seen, is the 7th Howling movie, which is called Howling New Moon Rising, which have either of you seen?
I have gotten too deep into the Howling series, and as much as I love Howling 2, Your Sister's a Werewolf, aka Sturba Werewolf Bitch. I have been haunted by the cover of The Howling 3, The Marsupials, since I was a teenager in a video store, and so I've never been able to bring myself to go further in the series.
On which a man called Clive Turner was the location scout. Clive Turner then went on to write, and he was involved in producing Howling 4, The Original Nightmare, which is a retelling of the original Howling because it's based on the same.
That's the one you made me want to watch the most.
Well, that's an interesting film on a thematic level, but it is kind of boring. I'm going to warn you. Clive Turner is then also involved in The Howling 5, the rebirth, which is interesting. And then The Howling 6 doesn't actually have much to do with Clive. He's not involved with The Howling 6. That film's called The Freaks, and it's interesting kind of vampire versus werewolf thing. But then we get to The Howling 7, which is directed by, written by, produced by, and starring Clive Turner.
Wow, A Star is Born.
And this is a film about an Australian man who turns up in a backwater town in California. And for the rest of the movie, we watch a lot of country music performances, an awful lot of extremely badly lit line dancing sequences.
Okay.
There's a lot of people just talking in a bar. It's a country and western documentary that has a werewolf in the last 5 minutes. And not only that, but the werewolf scene at the end is one of the worst transformations in the history of werewolf cinema. And then it just cuts to a scene of Clive Turner singing a country song.
Oh my God. Really? He put himself in the movie?
He stars in the movie. Yeah, he stars in the movie.
I do not like this.
What is the fascination of the country music, but also California? It feels very
it's a vanity project. It's
there we
100% a vanity project about Clive Turner's interests. It just happens to have the other thing it does as well is it tries to tie together the completely unrelated previous 3 movies.
Amazing.
4, 5, and 6. It tries to narratively link them together by a priest and a cop having a conversation, but none of it makes any sense at all. It's a complete waste of time. I'd almost rather be watching the shit line dancing sequences.
I'm just imagining it's a lot of hey, you hear about that freak show? No, but did you hear about those marsupials?
I once read a review of this film which started with the line, "I can't believe this film was made by real human beings." And I have to admit that I completely agree. It is genuinely dreadful. It is about the only werewolf film that I would discard into the ocean, frankly.
Wow, there you go.
It's really, really bad. And if you want to save 90 whole minutes of your life, then I would heavily suggest never watching it. Unless you get a big group of friends, a lot of alcohol.
Okay.
And you enjoy country music and line dancing.
There you go.
We knew Ted had to die before the full moon. The real werewolf couldn't take a chance.
I thought it was you, but I couldn't be sure until you rescued Ted.
Anyone else would have yelled for help or shot him.
Very good pick. Which is also interesting because you guys love how I didn't see The Howling. But
you should.
I know. Okay.
The Howling's honestly.
Yeah.
So good.
It's so weird that if you make a movie 7 more times, it's not good. It's so weird.
Well, the thing is, I love The Howling. I think The Howling is the greatest werewolf movie ever made. I like Howling 2. Howling 3 is ludicrous, but it's ludicrous in that it's got an Alfred Hitchcock caricature. It's got marsupial werewolves in pouches.
Yeah, that's my limit.
They're not even really werewolves. They're thylacines, which is a distinct kind of marsupial dog. It's fucking nuts, but it's interesting.
I think I have a couple of those in my family.
The 4th one does some interesting things with readapting the novel. The 5th one is a kind of interesting whodunit thing. The 6th one's a kind of vampire versus werewolf in a circus narrative. So there's things to take away from all of them. But the 7th
gutter
is genuinely one of the worst films I've ever seen.
I have often said if you get to your 6th movie and you haven't introduced a circus yet, you're doing something wrong.
Right.
Or taken your werewolves to space. I mean, why has there never been a Howling in
Howling
space?
in space. They would be a werewolf the whole time. They would be a wolf because the moon is always full in space.
Yep. Can you hear a werewolf howl at the moon on the moon?
But Andy Muschietti is apparently remaking The Howling for Netflix, although that news came out just before the pandemic, so I'm hoping the pandemic hasn't quashed that. But I'd be interesting to see what Andy Muschietti does with it.
Excellent pick. My 1-star review is 1997's An American Werewolf in Paris. And it's mostly just because, like, what is I'm sure at one point this movie, like, knew what it was, but, like, it is just, like, this mutant werewolf movie, like, lumbering along, because it's, like, wants to be funny, but, like, it's just little bro gross out. Like, poor Julie Bowen, who, like, is so young and hot in this movie, and they make her very stupid and idiotic. They kill her very quickly. The movie is just so juvenile. I don't know if you guys have ever been to, like, Paris and, like, just hung out casually, like, at the top of the Eiffel Tower, and then, like, I don't know, thought about bungee jumping. No big deal. It feels like the first thing you would do when bungee jumping would, like, I don't know, have it attached to something. Like, why would you attach it to your body first?
Yes.
The movie, like, I feel like
safety protocols. You're worried about the safety protocols in your American Werewolf in Paris movie.
I am just, this movie's just dumb. Everything about it is dumb. Julia Delpy deserves better. Like, she's clearly a very good actress, but, like, holy shit.
Isn't there any way that I can become human again?
Yeah, there is. But you're not gonna like it.
Tell me, how?
First, find the werewolf that bit you. Then kill it. Then eat out its heart.
What? But that means... Seraphine?
It's just truly, truly, you know, egregious on all fronts, is what I'll say. I didn't like anything about this movie.
I didn't rewatch it for this. I saw it when it initially came out and was not a big fan, and so I felt like we probably wouldn't talk too much about it unless it was in this particular area. So I have no defense for it, other than saying I also agree Julie Delpy deserves better. So in your book, you mentioned that she may or may not be the daughter of the characters of the werewolf from the original. Like, it's like heavily hinted at.
Alex Price. She's Jenny
well,
Agnes'
I was
character.
reading up, like, originally this movie was, like, in development hell for a long time, got rewritten I think 13 times is what I read. Like, and so originally there was going to be, like, some sort of, you know, spiritual sequel, but, like, this is literally, they said Euro trip but werewolves. And it literally is like, come on, bro. Like, are we fucking? Are you fucking? Like, it's just, like, the worst of, you know, like, the new, like, right before the new millennium, where it's just like...
It's interesting that it has the werewolf pack, and I also think that its utterly bonkers politics are very interesting, but as a film, no, it's not great. And early CGI werewolves...
so bad.
I mean, I'm not a fan of CGI werewolves even today.
Yeah.
But in 1997, pass.
Hard pass.
Yeah, there's something extra scary about something that's tactile. I think that's always what it comes down to. Another great pick, and I would say, and hopefully I don't want to belabor the point too much because it's not even a movie we talked about in the Rewind, but my least favorite out of all these is actually a big budget film. It was 2011's Red Riding Hood. This is clearly off the back of the success of Twilight, and it's a reinterpretation of the Brothers Grimm Little Red Cap, Little Red Riding Hood. Amanda Seyfried lives in a town beset by werewolves and or a werewolf, I should say. And Gary Oldman rides into town as a werewolf hunter, clearly picking up a paycheck, which is unfortunate because, like, for all we've learned about how terrible Gary Oldman is in real life, it's hard to beat him in a period piece. And yeah, she slowly comes to realize that she's a werewolf of like mind to the werewolf. And yeah, I don't know. The plot's so thin that it feels weird even talking about it. She's caught in a love triangle with two men who couldn't act their way out of a paper bag. Virginia Madsen, who I love, plays her mom in very small scenes, and I wish she'd been in more of the movie. In all honesty, you get Julie Christie as the grandmother. Poor Julie Christie is in this movie, had to say these lines. And it's just, I mean, everything's lit by torchlight. And I guess if I had to give a compliment, I would say like some of the cinematography is very good, but CG werewolves don't do a lot for me. And like I said, poor Amanda Seyfried keeps being put in this situation where she has to act against people who are not either at her level or just not interested in being in the film that they're in. And there's this whole like steampunk quality to it. And the opening sequence is an exact replica of the opening sequence of Twilight, which is frustrating as well. So yeah, 40, but hey, made for 42 million, made 90 million.
Jesus Christ.
So somebody saw it.
A couple folks.
Yeah, Leonardo DiCaprio produced it, which I always think is a weird fact. I don't think Catherine Hardwicke's direction is necessarily the problem, but it's certainly doesn't help that there's nothing like. It seems like she would have been like, I don't want to do this.
Right. She said, maybe I'm not going to make another movie, so let's just ride these Twilight coattails.
Exactly. Gary's attached. Let's do it.
Father, what are you doing here? Where's grandmother?
I had no choice. She finally realized what I am.
How could you do this?
Sit down. Sit down.
I've seen it once. I have nothing to say about it.
And we're going to move right the fuck along.
Perhaps the most damning critique.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that either of you saw that you didn't particularly like? I have a couple on my list that I and once again, here is not saying that these are the worst movies, but they are movies that, you know, maybe lack some things. I think my other, one of the other least favorites of mine is She-Wolf of London, because there is no werewolf in that movie. They're constantly telling you a character's.
The very first werewolf fake out film.
Yeah, it's the worst. And I was just like, really? You know, my official review of that is more like werewolf. Am I right?
I do like She-Wolf of London, but I can see why.
Oh, I mean, it's got stuff. It's very atmospheric, and I love. I mean, based on this Frankenstein poster behind me, I love the films of that era and the way that they're constructed. But I was just like, this is what we're gonna do.
I think I mentioned before in the rewind, like things that like really didn't hit for me, like Beast Must Die, like I mentioned. I thought Wolfman, I was like, fine. I also like the mysteries. Like I want them to be. I was like, oh, the dad. It's the dad. I will say it was very satisfying when Benicio del Toro like ate up that fucking entire room of scientists who are assholes.
My thing about the Wolfman is like I also am not the world's biggest fan of it, but like Benicio del Toro like is like great casting. And.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I kind of like the attempt to create a sort of action-based werewolf movie, but I think trying to create an action-based werewolf movie is also the major mistake it makes. It's meant to be a horror film. I think they're starting to realize now that those Universal remakes need to be horror movies, like The Invisible Man, and hopefully then Lee Whannell's Wolfman will be a horror film and not kind of an action blockbuster.
Right. Okay, great. So then let's get into our 5-star reviews.
Okay, well, I was going to go for Silver Bullet, but I think I kind of sang the gospel of Silver Bullet.
You did.
When we were talking about werewolf films in the 80s, but I love that film. It's probably, it's tied with The Howling as my favorite werewolf movie ever made, I think. I love Silver Bullet.
How do you feel about Gary Busey in Silver Bullet?
Well, he's manic, as he is in a lot of films that he's in the 80s and 90s.
I love the idea of like drunk uncle as the hero,
Yeah,
it's kind of going against that. I think it's also in some ways going against that kind of all-American hero thing. He's a complete fuck up, right? But he's the one who helps them to actually solve everything, and I think that works really well with the way it's deconstructing these kind of underpinning values of America. But on that note, in terms of kind of deconstructing America, I think the film I'm going to go for, having spoken about Silver Bullet a bit too much in the 80s section, is Late Phases, which I love. I am a huge fan of Late Phases, directed by Adrian Bogliano, written by Eric Stoltz, who is a very nice guy, and produced by Larry Fessenden. It's just an amazing kind of deconstruction of America in that you've got a blind Vietnam veteran who's putting in a nursing home, a kind of retirement community, and finds out that retirement community is being preyed on by a werewolf. I don't want to say too much more about it than that, really, but it ends up kind of deconstructing militarism through the main character, through the protagonist who can't let go of that whole life based on conflict and military codes and discipline. It ends up deconstructing kind of capitalist American community through some of the other people who live in that retirement community, and it comes to deconstruct Christianity as well.
Oh yeah.
In a way I'm not going to say too much more about, because I think it kind of goes into vast spoiler territory. But Late Phases is by far, I think, my favourite modern werewolf film. I think Werewolves Within comes close because it's got very similar themes around kind of a werewolf in a community and the way it tears that community to pieces. But I'm a big fan of kind of low budget independent American horror cinema, and I think in terms of recent examples of that in the werewolf subgenre, Late Phases is by far the best. And I love Nick Damici. I think he's a great actor.
Yeah,
it's funny,
and the way he plays blindness in that film is incredible.
Can you make silver bullets?
Oh, yeah. I can make silver bullets. What guns?
Smith & Wesson 64 revolver, Remington 700 BDL rifle.
Yeah, I can make those.
Can you do silver shotgun shells?
Shotgun shells? Well, shotgun shells are a little more complicated. They take like an hour to make.
I only need one. I'll take it.
So you can watch Late Phases for free on Tubi, I think. So really accessible. I liked the movie. I think that the wolves I thought looked a little like fun furry to me. But
well, I would like to talk about why I think the werewolves look the way they look, but it goes into massive spoiler territory again.
We'll talk off the pod.
Yes, but I actually really like the werewolves in that film.
Okay.
They took a little while to grow on me, but they're on the cover of the book.
Those are the werewolves from Late Phases on your book?
There's one
of them.
I mean, the listeners can't see this, so
no,
I'm
they
pointing
can't.
at things. But
podcasting, famously a visual medium.
There's a werewolf on the front cover of Phases of the Moon that is from Late Phases. Yeah, I really love this.
Okay, also though, another movie where the dog fights the werewolf. I fucking stresses me out so much.
I have to say too, in terms of the werewolf, I'm a professional editor. That's my trade. And so the transformation once again, without saying too much, but the transformation in that movie is so good and so seamless that I had to go in and go frame by frame to figure out how they did it. And I did. I caught it, but and I'm not going to tell you how they did it, but I was impressed. It's so subtle and it's so well done when the werewolf finally, I was like, clever.
Yeah, one of the greatest transformation sequences on film. I think.
Great pick. My 5-star review is gonna go to 1984's The Company of Wolves. I took a fairy tales class in my undergrad, and we read The Bloody Chamber, where the short story comes from. And watching this movie, it feels like literature, like capital L literature, come to life. It's very theatrical. It's funny because what you were talking about, Craig, with these the other movies that you had mentioned, the modern feminist telling, like I remember feeling at the end of this movie like, yes, bitch, become the wolf, fucking join the pack, like roam free, fuck your grandma who's like, I mean, the whole idea of the fairy tale of Little Red Riding Hood, which I think I don't think it's super common to realize that the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood is a wolf man. But like the theme, the moral of, not trusting men who have eyebrows that connect and staying on the path like this.
I know, drag me.
I know. Hello. But like it's the into the woods of it all. Like, experience, like, girls have to be one way, live life one way. And this movie is kind of stories layered and weaves throughout. There's like a big frame around it. Maybe it's a dream. Maybe it's a dream within a dream. It's just so lush and beautiful. And like the way I read up on it, they had like 12 trees and had to make this like entire forest thing. It's
basically
the girl,
a budget of $4 that they set on fire immediately. Yeah,
correct. Sarah Patterson is so young in this movie. She's the lead, and the wolf man is significantly older. It's very heavy-handed with the visualized, stylized of it all, but like it does this magical realism so well. I think, and the beginning of this movie, her sister, goes off the path, and and there's all these stories about this woman who. Literally, they're like, she hooked up with a gypsy man, and haha, he's actually a fucking werewolf. And you get the great transform. It's a really grisly, gnarly like transformation. But it's this girl who's really fucking whip smart. She's like, maybe I want to kiss a boy, maybe I fucking don't, and I'm gonna do whatever I fucking want. And the ending is just so satisfying. It's like the wolves the transformation for me was, realizing these wolves aren't something to be scared of. They're these free spirits to join, like they don't fucking stay on the path. They get to do whatever they want to do. And this girl finding her womanhood, finding, out about sex, finding out about, how life is unfair and fucking, not being timid and not going to be like the prey.
You are kind. Or they're kind.
Not one nor the other. Both.
Then where do you live? In our world or theirs?
I come and go between them. My home is nowhere.
Are you only a man when you dress like one? My, what big arms do you have?
All the better to hug you with.
So turning from like this thing to be hunted into the person in control and having this agency. The scene of her, like the classic retelling of the scene of, grandma has had her head bopped off by the wolf.
Yeah.
And so it's this wonderful, sexually charged, really kinetic scene of her talking to the wolf and being like, like she's holding her own against him with her wits and wily, and he's trying to reinventing the way of like, he's not there to murder her. He's not there to eat her. He's there to fuck. And so her playing this really delicate dance of being like, how much power do you have? How much power do I have? And again, it's a little disconcerting. She's a young girl. She's maybe 15, 16, and he's minimum 25. And that's me being generous. And it all just comes together so well. I think it's visually very striking, and it's accessible because there's so many things that you're like, oh, fuck. It's this retelling of the story that I have heard, but it's really driving home this theme of, agency in women and controlling your life and fucking becoming the wolf. It's amazing.
It's a great review. My book started as a PhD thesis, and when I finished the thesis, my supervisor gave me an original quad poster, so an original British cinema poster for The Company of Wolves.
It's so good. So there's like a couple.
There's actually not a great deal on it in the book, but it has a place close to my heart.
There's a couple different posters, but the one that's like really great is like the wolf coming out of the guy's mouth.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's just a real magical quality to the movie that a lot of other werewolf movies, have a tendency to go for the gritty, the real.
Yeah, and talk about sticking the landing.
That movie's all metaphor anyways, but like to add to that metaphor, you have that fantastical setting.
And the transformation scene is truly disgusting.
Oh,
disgusting.
Truly. And once again, in a film that you wouldn't expect it to be, because everything else is played in terms of the look of the film, is played so light and magical.
It's fantastical, but then out of nowhere, it is gruesome.
Yeah.
And even like, in the side tale of this man who's been away for so long, comes back, beats the shit out of his like wife who has started a new family, and then fucking turns into this beast. It's like, and then to hear the girl being like, do all men end up hitting their wives? And the grandma's like, only if you're a bad girl, if you get off the path. It's like, Jesus.
I love the portrayal of the old way of thinking through the grandmother, and
Angela Lansbury.
She's fantastic in the movie. And another movie that you wouldn't associate with her, but she's really great. I'm going to build off of everything you're saying, and I'm going to be a little more basic. My pick would be Ginger Snaps. And yes, it is an overexposed film in terms of academia and papers written about it, but I do think that there's a reason for that, and I think obviously it's that start of that, like, you know, it takes everything that you would learn from Company of Wolves and places it into a more traditional werewolf narrative. Ginger Snaps is about two sisters. You also, I think, culturally really bring it out in a fascinating way when you talk about how like close to Columbine it was, and you know, these two sisters who are sort of, they're very, in a way, gothy. They're sort, you know, they're
obsessed with death.
Yeah, they're obsessed with death. They have a suicide pact. You know, one of the first scenes, they're talking about how they would kill some of their classmates, and you know that's it's dark territory. And you have Bridget and Ginger Fitzgerald. They're out one night and they're attacked by a werewolf. Ginger gets the bite and she starts slowly turning. It's this big metaphor for coming into your own sexually.
Well, she gets her period right before.
Yes, she gets her period right before, which is what attracts the werewolf, the smell of blood. I agree with you, Craig. As the movie goes on, it mixes its metaphor a little bit. It does have a tendency to be like, well, this has to be suppressed and controlled. And I think the second movie like really pushes that, which is maybe, you know, unfortunate because it feels less feminist to be like women should be you know, under the heel of something, this addiction to monkshood. But anyways, yeah, her younger sister sees these changes in her and is actively attempting to cure her sister, because she only sees a negative in this. She sees, I'm gonna lose my sister to this newfound, be it maturity, sexual awakening, and her sister is going balls to the wall into it. Unfortunately, it also turns her into a predator and a murderer.
What are you looking at, huh? My pen exploded, okay? My red pen.
That was fucking incredible. Get your camera. Don't you have your camera? This is wall-worthy. Come on.
You gave it to Jason. You had unprotected sex and you infected him. Oops.
Without spoiling too much, you wind up in conflict of this girl who genuinely believes she has the best interest for her sister at heart, and this other woman who, you know, basically like, I just want to run and howl at the moon and have sex with who I want to have sex with, and maybe occasionally eat them.
Ain't that the way? Ain't that just the way?
But I also think this is a really fascinating look at the way siblings interact with each other. I mean, I only have sisters.
Yeah, same.
And I think there's something to be said about their relationship. They have this very symbiotic relationship. They share a same room. And I do think when you're young, when you're in the Bridget role and you have an older sibling, you look up to them in a way that you want to be like them. And then there does get to a point in which you reject the, you know, the thing that makes your sibling. I know, like, that experience of like this person maturing and rejecting you as the younger sibling and moving on into their own and doing their own thing. But I like that element of this movie as well. I like that it's not just saying, you know, the average claptrap about werewolves and, oh, they become a monster and somebody has to stop them. It also really digs deep into that relationship. And sidebar, completely unrelated to everything I'm saying, originally this film apparently was they tried to get Sarah Polley and Natasha Lyonne to play these roles, and both of them turned it down. But I would watch the fuck out of that movie.
Absolutely. I love the mom in this movie.
Mimi Rogers. Yeah,
because for a lot of it she's like kind of like, she's there but like just doesn't get it. She's kind of like, you know, a mom who doesn't understand, but you know, in the end, she fucking shows up, and also not only shows up, but is like, my life is kind of a lie. This is all kind of a lie. Like, you know, being a woman does fucking suck. So you're in trouble, and women sometimes are in trouble, and no one can help us. And that's the truth of society. And I fucking love that. I also
and I like it's not necessarily a mom that's portrayed. I mean, there's a couple bits, but it's never a mom that's portrayed as like, oh, she's an adult, she's so lame. Like she is, you know, she's like, girls, how many times have I told you to stop pretending to kill yourself in the house?
Right.
You know, like,
oh, you sweet silly girls.
I think that the film depicts her as almost liberal to a fault.
Yes,
doesn't it?
yeah,
Right.
exactly, yeah, maybe to her own disadvantage.
Right, because she says like, my fear is like, I'm letting you guys figure things out for yourself. I'm scared. Is that working? And so like, there is also like this thing about like, how do you raise young women, and how do you like teach them about sex and sexuality? And she wants to be there. She wants to tell her about, you know, like, but like the classic is like, you know, when Bridget goes to like the counselor and is like, I've got hair in weird places, my body is changing, there's a lot of blood. And the counselor's like, that's normal. That's just us gals.
She's like, here's a condom. Play safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the flip side, I love how fast the mum jumps to, we'll just hide the body and burn the house down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
she said, that's fucking rock.
It'll be fine. Yeah, it'll be fine.
What's not funny, but like, to me, what really got me was at the beginning, Bridget is like, oh, we're not going to really kill ourselves. Like, that's not a thing. And Ginger's like, no, we said that. And we're going to fucking die.
We're going to die in this room. Yeah, like, we're going to die together.
And at the end of the movie, without getting too spoilery, she's kind of confronted again with that decision of like, are we going to die in this fucking room? Right. Is this really going to fucking happen? And I thought that was like kind of really powerful. And so to me,
I love
what
that
was
relationship.
To me, I guess if it zeroes really in on just this girl making a decision about, you know, her sister, and not only her sister's like, you know, newfound power and sexuality, but like mental health, mental state. Like, cause this bitch, even without the werewolf shit, like, it's not that you're a goth girl. It's like you are.
Yeah, you had some issues. You had some issues. It builds or continues building that platform for the fourth wave feminist movies, and I do think, like I said, unfortunately, I didn't get to watch all of them because we only have 2 weeks. But watching Wildling, I was like, yes, I was like, this is the obvious like next continuation step of like where these stories need to go.
I think you guys have got Bloodthirsty on Shudder, I think.
Yeah.
So that's worth watching, and When Animals Dream is a great movie. I will also say that although I think what I write about Ginger Snaps in the book might be a little bit contentious with some fans, I deny anybody to read that book and be able to tell me which of those films I personally enjoy and which ones I don't, because there's not a great deal in that book on quality judgments at all.
I will say, and that's when you're writing an academic text, that's not what you're setting out to do. And I do I was going to say, like, one of the fun things about having you on is we actually get to hear about which ones that you do actually like, because you don't, you know, that's not what you're doing when you write one of those books.
Well, I have a ridiculously high tolerance for werewolf movies. There's a guy called Craig Clark who writes reviews for werewolfnews.com, and he is the other person I know who watches pretty much every single werewolf movie. And I think both of us have an extremely high tolerance for werewolf films. So a lot of the films that I write about in the book, I think many people would not like at all, but I find something to like about them. As I mentioned my PhD supervisor earlier, when I finished the PhD, he did tell me that he's glad he'll never have to watch My Mom's a Werewolf ever again, which is a film I actually quite enjoy.
Yeah, I was going to say, I counted this as a first-time watch for it because I did watch it for this, but I have a lot of vivid memories of like the end of that movie. And honestly, God bless them for casting John Saxon in a role in which he's fucking hot. Because honestly, so many movies in the 80s, he's like insane or a dad, but this movie he's like, no, I'm rolling up on your mom, babe.
Okay.
Gonna bite her on the big toe.
Yes,
oh
exactly.
My! Were there other standout werewolf movies that you guys want to give a shout out to? So, Craig, you mentioned some of these ones that people can find on Shudder. Gavin, anything that you wanted to mention?
I mean, obviously The Howling. I mean, there's hard to beat the contemporary look at, or what sparks the contemporary look at werewolfism, and it perfectly mixes both. It's not, by any means, it's not a comedy. I would say that opening sequence is terrifying, in all honesty. I remember seeing it as a kid and being scared of it, but there are comedic moments because Joe Dante is a master of blending the genre and finding the right moments to really pull out those tricks. And yeah, I love The Howling.
Joe Dante is perhaps my favorite director of all time, and The Howling, I think, is the greatest werewolf movie ever made. And if you're only ever going to watch one, I would suggest watching The Howling. It's incredible.
Excellent. So before we get into our fast forward, why don't we do our mixed reviews review? So my 1-star review was An American Werewolf in Paris. That's from 1997.
My 1-star review was 2011's Red Riding Hood.
And my 1-star review is Howling New Moon Rising from 1995.
That's Howling 7.
It's Howling 7.
To be clear. My 5-star review was 1984's The Company of Wolves.
My 5-star review was 2000's Ginger Snaps.
And my 5-star review is 2014's Late Phases.
All excellent picks, so why don't we move into our fast forward?
This is the Werewolf Break. Have you guessed who the werewolf is?
And so we're in our fast forward now, which means that we're talking about the future of the werewolf movies. And as you mentioned, we're in sort of a werewolf renaissance. We talked about it a couple times. Werewolves Within is out this year. Comedy.
You can watch it on Amazon. It's like $3.
Yeah. You know, obviously, at this point in time, in order to move werewolfism on film along, you're going to be hitting metaphors, more and more metaphors and new metaphors. But I liked that, once again, this was, as you mentioned, this was fully, you know, the America's decimation. It's
correct.
People not trusting each other, the lack of community, the Trumpism. Like, yeah, you nailed it on the head with that. So, but I'm curious as to where you guys think the next sort of big thing is going to be coming from.
So there's, Ryan Gosling is going to star as the Wolfman in a remake of it, which I can't wait for because I love Ryan Gosling. So I'm very much looking forward to that. It'll be interesting to see what exactly they do with it. There was I think some rumors going around that it was going to be in some way similar to Nightcrawler. Have you guys seen that film, Jake Gyllenhaal? There were some rumors going around that it was similar to that in some ways.
Okay.
So that would be interesting.
God, I just hope it's the Wolfman driving around with Riz Ahmed the whole time.
I know. Trying to get the shot.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of interesting films to be found. Bloodthirsty, I would recommend. Teddy, Blood Moon. But I think the interesting thing now is that although in the past I've always been able to see really succinct cycles of werewolf movies that are all doing similar things, I think now filmmakers are starting to recognise that there's more potential for metaphor with werewolves, and so films are often doing very different things at the same time, which is sort of where the last chapter of the book goes, to various different kind of clusters, I think, rather than overarching cycles. So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for kind of where werewolves will go next.
Yeah, I was actually just sort of having this conversation with Louis that it's that mindset that perfection is the enemy of the good. And I think a lot of the times when it comes to werewolf movies, people see that, you know, it's not, you know, you think of vampires and you're just like, oh, I just have to slap some pointy teeth, or you look at zombie movies and it's like, oh, just do some makeup and some wounds. But with werewolves, it's oftentimes thought about like it has to be this big production. It has to be a giant wolf and a human. And I think that holds a lot of people back. And I think we're finally in an era in which, you know, filmmaking is more everybody that has, you know, a good iPhone in their pocket can be a filmmaker. I think we're heading towards a place where people are like, well, maybe it doesn't have to be a big special effect, and maybe it doesn't, you know, maybe it can be something, you know, like you said, the thing that's more interesting is the metaphor than it is necessarily a big makeup feature.
I think that's the thing. It's two things, isn't it? It's realizing that werewolves can be done without having to spend a lot of money, because we've gotten this far into the podcast without mentioning the fact that the reason there are very few werewolf films comparative to zombies or vampires is because they're really expensive.
Right.
So I think people are figuring out new ways to do werewolves as an effect, and also recognizing that there are more things that can be done with it, just rather than just tortured soul, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. I think we really didn't talk at all about Teen Wolf, the MTV show,
because why would we?
But also, like, it kind of just proves that like there was such a huge appetite for that type of shit on MTV. I mean, it was very popular.
I mean, that and this is as somebody who's, I hate to admit this, seen every episode of it. I mean, that I feel like owes a great deal more to like Buffy than it does to any sort of werewolf thing, but
fair. Yeah, very fair. But just to say that I think there is like clearly, there's a new life in the genre coming. But it also feels like even though when sometimes we feel like it goes away, it just like is always part of the culture. And I think as long as like, from the days of like tragic, someone stop me, kill me, to like the very me-centric, I don't want to die and I can control my destiny, to like this. I love the way that the genre is just very malleable and can fit so many different things. Craig, you were mentioning there are new movies that are kind of like playing on metaphors about race and things that we haven't really seen before. I do think even like Werewolves Within, like this is something we haven't seen before. And this idea that kind of like, I remember when we were doing zombies, the zombies is a stand-in for like disease, but also like social disease. And I think Werewolves is now beginning to be used in the same way, because like the horror is out there. Like this town is being torn apart, not only by an actual werewolf, but by community infighting. And I love that idea.
And those are my favorite werewolf movies, really. The films that use werewolves in that way. I think there's a very clear through line of Silver Bullet, Late Phases through to Werewolves Within that are doing that thing. And I hope that does continue. That kind of the werewolf in the midst kind of narrative.
Yeah, excellent. Well, we'll have to wait and see what Ryan Gosling does. But until then...
None of us even brought up the brilliance of Cursed.
Cursed?
You know what? I would do horrible things to see the original edit of that movie.
Me too. And apparently, like, people quote unquote say it exists. I've been in this business a long time enough to know that there is no possible complete version of that, but good luck on finding the like closest version of that. But yeah, I would too, in all honesty. I mean,
I'm a huge Wes Craven fan, and I would love to see his version.
I feel bad for him about that movie. In all honesty, it was going to be my 1-star review, but I was just like, I like Craven too much to do that to him.
And I'm sure there was a good movie there.
Yeah,
I'm convinced that then it just got hacked to bits.
Hacked to bits, just like a werewolf slashing away. I didn't even mention once there's a lot of gruesome shit in the werewolves world. So
what?
Shut up, Kevin. I texted you at the very beginning.
I will say one of my favorite interpretations of werewolf recently is the werewolves on the children's cartoon Summer Camp Island, which you can find on HBO Max. Those werewolves are great. And so check those werewolves out. And they rarely tear people open. So
love that. That's my favorite type of werewolf. Well, excellent. Craig, thank you so much for coming on the show and hanging out with us and really illuminating this dark, spooky, ooky creature. Everyone go out and buy Craig's book, Phases of the Moon.
Yes, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. This is your moment to tell everybody where they can find you online, where they can find your book, and where they can buy it. And you everybody promised to buy it right now. Right. So I'm holding you to it.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. This has been really fun. I'm on Twitter, at Craig Ian Mann, if you want to follow me on Twitter. The book is available from all good bookstores. No, it's available from a lot of places online, including our corporate overlords, if that's where you want to get it from.
Correct.
Just give the title a Google and you'll find somewhere to buy it from. It's called Phases of the Moon: A Cultural History of the Werewolf Film, or you can buy it direct from Edinburgh University Press, which is the publisher. And thank you very much for reading it, and thank you for being so complimentary. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's great. It's genuinely great, and I do highly recommend going out and picking it up, especially if you're interested in werewolves on film. And once again, you just don't get this kind of thing about this specific of a subject. And I love reading that. Like I think you even mentioned in the book, David J. Schall, I have his books up there and stuff, but like he's a much more like general, and I love the minutia. I'm very into that.
Well, my great aim in my career and life is to write stuff that people outside of academia actually want to read and enjoy.
Yeah, there you go.
And so hearing people tell me that they have read it and they enjoy it outside of academia is really, makes it worth it. So thank you.
Well, it certainly doesn't read like stereo instructions.
Thank you.
Beetlejuice callback. So I guess that wraps up our episode. Thank you everybody for joining us for this spooky season. This is our final episode for Halloween, and we hope you have a very spooky time. But if you want to find us online to talk to us, to chat to us, to give us suggestions, you can always find us on Twitter at The Mixed Reviews.
We're on Facebook. Just type in The Mixed Reviews.
You can email us at reviewsmixed@gmail.com. Write us a little love note.
Yeah, we're on Instagram at _mixed_reviews.
And if you want to listen to us like you've been listening to this entire episode, we have a massive back catalog, including all of our spooky season shows. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, Amazon, any of the major apps. And if you do listen to us on Apple Podcasts, please drop by, give us a 5-star rating and review, and we'll read it on the show. We love getting those.
Go outside, howl at the moon, and but say like The Mixed Reviews, and we'd really appreciate that. Thank you guys for listening, and have a really fun and safe Halloween.
We'll see you next time. The moon cycles.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Werewolves have done